Extra time.
Hello and welcome back to the Extra Time podcast. It's me, your host, Patrick Van Straaten, and today I'm joined by Dougie Critchley. How's it going, Dougie?
I'm good, thank you. Thanks for having me back on, Pat. Yeah, no, I'm good. I feel like spring has finally arrived in the UK. Got a little bit of a plan to get us out of this hell of a lockdown, so I'm feeling pretty optimistic on this Monday morning as far as it goes anyway. How are you?
I'm pretty good, man. Yes, like the end of lockdown is theoretically in sight, but I'm also kind of like, God, it's like April before anything significant changes.
True.
And at that point, I've got like a month until my baby arrives. So I've got one lockdown ending and another lockdown beginning, and there's like a month of freedom in the middle where I'm going to be on day release from prison. So yeah, I don't know. Like, it is getting nicer. Like, I've actually got some natural sunlight coming through the window, so hopefully the vitamin D is going to pep me up for today's pod.
Yeah, I got burnt this weekend, sunburnt.
What?
It was very embarrassing. I met a friend for a couple of beers in the park, and yeah, I've burnt my nose, which I don't know whether you can see on camera, and obviously those listening on audio won't be able to see it. But yeah, I've got a little bit burnt. I'm very pale and pasty with my Scottish roots, so I'm a little bit embarrassed. I'm going to have to start wearing sun cream. I think it's mainly my skin has gone sort of translucent in the last year without any sun, and it's just a little bit vulnerable at the moment. So yeah, I have to start looking after it better.
You got burnt in England in February.
I know. It's quite something. My nose is very red, so not ideal.
Oh, well, I'm sporting an unusual look today as well. I'm wearing a hat, which I don't normally do, but
nice.
But I had a haircut on Saturday, and the haircut's actually fine. Like, I mean, we basically left the length on top and just like pretty much buzzed it on the sides. But I do think I need a corrective procedure
before you go public.
Well, not so much for the front, but the back is pretty rogue. Like there's some interesting patterns going on at the back. So I think we'll have a little look at that today. But also my head's really cold, so I'm wearing a hat indoors today. Fair enough.
Yeah, it sounds like you got some sort of crop patterns at the back of your head, which is probably not the ideal look for March.
As incomprehensible as crop circles. So today we figured that we were going to talk a little bit. I wanted to kind of get you on because you're currently, I would say, the Phil Foden expert on Football Daily. You wrote and explained about Phil Foden and his breakthrough season this year. And I'd seen some debate recently about what England's attacking lineup could be for the Euros. And obviously, when it gets closer to the Euros, we'll probably do like a full squad analysis or a full lineup, or at least the England fans in the office will. So we're not going to get into the defence and the formation and stuff today, but we thought it'd be interesting to talk about what the best front line would be, because I was looking at the Premier League stats, as I do, and 6 out of the top 10 scorers in the Premier League right now are English.
It's a good
and
time.
5 of the top 10 assisters are English. And Phil Foden is not in either group, but is still a very strong contender to go to the Euros. And so what we wanted to talk about today is Foden's breakthrough season, you know, what's kind of special about him, how it's affected City's form, and also what England's attacking lineup maybe should be for the Euros and the alternatives they have available to them. So obviously City are on this incredible run right now, Dukes. And despite the fact that we all would probably agree that Kevin De Bruyne is City's best player and potentially the best player in the league, it's kind of come without him, right?
Yeah, big time. I mean, he started the season quite slowly by his own exceptional standards, then had a really good period, then got injured and has missed a hell of a lot of games. And Aguero obviously hasn't been fit as well. And that's been their two sort of main attacking threats over the last 2 or 3 years. And couple that with David Silva leaving, who averaged 0.5 goal contributions per game across 10 years in England. I saw when I was researching for this Phil Foden script. So all those factors taken into account, Phil Foden has had to step up in a bigger way than I think many people thought possible, and just really delivered so far this year. I mean, he's got 11 goals and 4 assists in 33 appearances across the season. And unlike a lot of City's attacking players in Gabriel Jesus, Riyad Mahrez, and even Sterling to a degree, who I think's form has really picked up recently, Sterling and Mahrez, but started the season comparatively slowly. I think Foden and Gundogan in the last sort of 6 weeks have been Man City's most potent attacking weapons and probably the most consistent performers across the entire campaign. And I think Foden has really done exceptionally well playing on the wing, which not many people thought he would prior to this season. I think most people see him as a number 10 going forward, or potentially even in midfield, but he's played out on the wing, and I think he's averaged a goal contribution every 130 minutes, which is only about 5 minutes more than Jadon Sancho at Dortmund, his great friend from the Man City Academy. And Foden's rise has been carefully managed, I would say, and pretty patient as well. I think a lot of people were calling for his inclusion into more Premier League squads and Premier League starting lineups a couple of years ago, because he was consistently used in cup competition to sort of devastating effect, really, around between 17-18 and 18-19. A lot of goal contributions in the cups. They pretty much dominated the Carabao Cup. They got to FA Cup finals as well. And there was a lot of worry around that time that City weren't really utilising their best young player sort of effectively, because they'd seen that Jadon Sancho had thought the grass would be greener elsewhere. They'd seen that Brahim Diaz had gone over to Real Madrid thinking he'd get more opportunities, and people were worried that Phil Foden wouldn't get the sort of minutes his talent deserved, because he only made 10 appearances across 2017-18, and that was the year after he'd shone at the Under-17 World Cup and Euros, winning the Golden Ball at the World Cup, followed by 26 in 2018-19, but just 13 of those came in the Premier League with just 3 starts. And his 330 league minutes that season was half that of anyone else in the City's squad, which is really quite incredible. And whilst last season saw him play 1,000 league minutes for the first time, he only played more than 60 minutes in 3 games prior to lockdown. And it wasn't until after lockdown when I think he scored against Arsenal. I think there was a goal against Everton. There was a goal against Liverpool as well in that devastating 4-0 win after they'd been crowned champions, or when they were just about to be crowned champions, that people like Phil Foden is ready to play in the Premier League consistently. And this year, he's just been absolutely awesome, I think. I think his ability to read what is going on around him in minute detail before the ball has even got to him. He just has outstanding vision, in sort of David Silva-esque vision. But he's quick. He can control the ball off either foot, in front or behind him. His depth perception is really good. His angles are really good. He's not got the most incredible skill set in terms of one-on-one skill ability, sort of tricks and that sort of thing. But it's incredible to see how often he'll beat his man just with a change of direction slightly, or shifting his weight, or changing the ball from one foot to the other. And he's really, really dangerous in sort of all facets of the game. And then his shooting, which I think is probably the best area of his game, which isn't really talked about, I just think is really, really good. He's very, very adept at firing off shots when defenders don't quite expect it. There was a great piece on The Athletic the other day by Sam Lee and I think Tom Warville as well, who were talking about his shot accuracy and how he targets the bottom area of the goal so effectively, down to, beyond keepers, low to the left or right. And he's just come on leaps and bounds this year and become absolutely central to this City side. And Pep Guardiola has used his resources superbly. And it just feels like this is Foden's time, and he's really stepped up magnificently and been a crucial part of this City win, because obviously he's played a role in 2 of their titles prior to this season, and I think 6 trophies in all prior to this season. But this will be the first one where he's absolutely central to it, and I think he deserves a lot of plaudits.
Yeah, I think so as well. And I mean, like, what's been really interesting is, as you say, we talked for years about Phil Foden as an attacking midfielder. Even he was discussed as a central midfielder, and now has that position playing off the wing, which kind of gives him, I suppose it allows him to see the whole pitch because he is left-footed, so he's always facing play out there. But he is actually a surprisingly good one-on-one threat. And what is so amazing about him is his ability in tight areas. Like, I think that in lots of ways, he's quite a conventional 10 in his skill set, right? Like, he's a really good passer. He does make runs and he does score goals, but he's not like physically exceptional. However, I do think that is something he's developed this season, that ability to beat a guy one-on-one, and just probably as well, the introduction of VAR means that players now know they're not really going to get away with little nicks on players' ankles or knees, and
for sure,
his close control in the box makes him such a threat there. I guess the thing with Foden is he also adds that defensive intensity, which we are kind of, I was going to say we're seeing it more and more, but it is now one of those things that I think you can't quite get away with not doing unless you're like the one player on a team who's allowed not to do it. So, for instance, I think it's in real stark contrast to a player like Jack Grealish. The intensity of Phil Foden's defensive game, right? Because in your FD Explained, you wrote that I think he was up around 2 tackles and interceptions a game. I think for pressures, he's only behind 2 guys in the squad. I think it might be Rodri and
De Bruyne. Yeah.
Yeah, so he's really, really working hard defensively. And it's that which makes you think, okay, this guy's offering something else besides creative passing when he's in the team.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, just on that FD Explained, it's. I mean, we write a lot of scripts here at Football Daily, and it's sometimes rare that you really. Sometimes you kind of you make a bit, not a meal of a script, but you don't feel that passion, you don't feel that drive to write it. But this I found so exciting to write about Phil Foden, and I just kind of got into this zone. I'm not saying it's I'm not saying it's a work of art or anything, but it was such an interesting topic to write about. And actually, as you delve into his stats, there's so much that stands out. And yes, his defensive performances are part of that. I think it was over 15 pressures per game, which is not superb, but for a City side that see the most possession in the Premier League, one of the most in Europe, that's pretty solid, as you say, only behind Rodri and De Bruyne. But it's no surprise when he's got such an sort of inbuilt love of City. He grew up in a family of predominantly United fans, but it's always been City for him. He got scouted at the age of 5 when he was playing for a local under-8 side, and then they went to his primary school and they were looking at his brother. He's been with City for that long. He's been part of he's been their most exciting prospect for that long as well. They really nurtured his talent. What I found most interesting when I was doing the research was that they said that City's sort of they call it unopposed technical practice, which is what they do at City throughout all their age groups. So it's basically working around mannequins, passing and moving around mannequins and finishing into empty nets to help players with their positional awareness, their sort of vision, their technical skills. And lots of clubs don't do it, but Sam Lee, the Athletic City correspondent, wrote a piece about it, and he said it's been central to Foden's development. And you can see it in his game, watching the Premier League, like his scanning ability, his quick decision making. It's sort of second to none. But I feel like still with Foden and England, if we're moving on to this England discussion, there's no guarantee, and I don't necessarily think he should be a nailed-on starter this summer in every system, in every game. It really depends on how Gareth Southgate wants to set up, and I'd really like him to go with 4-2-3-1 or 4-3-3 and ditch the 5 at the back, because I actually don't think it suits England's centre-back options that well. I think you're fine with Maguire, Stones, Trent and Shaw or Chilwell. I'd probably go Shaw at the moment, on the basis of his current form. And then you're probably going to have Rice sitting. If Henderson's fit, he should definitely start as well. So you've effectively got 4 up-front options to fill. Kane is obviously going to start, being England captain. Sterling and Rashford are going to be difficult to leave out. So effectively, he's competing with Grealish, Sancho, Mount, and those probably the 4 leading the way. Maybe Maddison as well. And I'm not sure that Foden has to be a nailed-on starter just yet. I feel like he could make such an impact off the bench. I feel like he's the sort of ability. He's got a real ability to speed up play and slow it down, and his natural acceleration as well could be really dangerous coming off the bench. And there's just no guarantee for me that he's going to start this summer. But he's got to be in the squad. Hands down, has to be in the squad. And then you've got players like Bukayo Saka, who probably deserve to be in the squad as well. Like, England's attacking options are so stacked right now, but I feel like Rashford, Kane, Sterling will probably start, and then Foden coming off the bench, I would have thought. But there are so many options, and it is such an exciting time to be an English football fan.
Okay, so in your opinion, Rashford's going to start over Grealish. I mean, the thing is, I sort of imagined that we'd have a discussion about like where Foden was more likely to play for England. And in a way, it feels like the avenue into the team is easier on the right wing, right? But I suppose that depends whether Grealish then plays on the left or plays as a 10. Like, if you play a 4-2-3-1, then Grealish can play as a 10. You could play Sterling on the left, and then you're looking at Foden competing with Sancho, probably Bukayo Saka, Hudson-Odoi, and that's really kind of it. There are players like Greenwood and Barnes, but there's not a lot of competition for that right wing slot. Whereas if you've got a front three, suddenly it gets really, really difficult to fit him in, because at that point, really you're kind of between Sterling and Sancho on the right, and on the left between Sterling, Rashford and Grealish, and places become kind of limited.
Yeah, I can't imagine, knowing what we do about Gareth Southgate and his propensity to which is fair enough. He's seen England's errors at previous tournaments. He doesn't want to leave the side exposed. I think he'll play 4-3-3, and if Henderson's fit, I think it'll be Henderson and Rice. And then I think of those other midfield options that is most suited for a midfield three over Foden and over Grealish is probably Mason Mount. And I can see Gareth Southgate picking Mason Mount, which I don't really have a problem with. I think Mason Mount's an exceptional player. He's had an exceptional season. So I feel like Foden is kind of competing with Sterling and Sancho on that right wing, although Sterling might also compete for the left wing. And then Grealish is competing with Rashford, and then Kane will start through the middle. It is kind of how I see it right now. And I feel like there's with Foden, I think he's only got 3 caps. And there was obviously that error in November. I'm not going to hammer a 20-year-old for making a mistake, breaking COVID protocols with Mason Greenwood, but that will. I think it might have an impact in March. He needs to. I can't see Southgate shoving in Foden from the first minute of the first game. It's going to be eased into it, and I don't think he's now going to start in March, because I think that would probably send the wrong message, or Southgate would think it would send the wrong message to the rest of the England squad. I mean, the last thing he had with England, he was thrown out of the camp. Although, everyone makes mistakes, particularly young players. Not going to get into that again, but I feel like Foden has more work to do to regain Southgate's trust before I see him as a guaranteed starter. And also, I just think he's going to be such a good impact player off the bench with potentially Grealish or Rashford. I feel like Sterling's bound to start. I feel like Kane's bound to start. And then the rest of them, Sancho, Rashford, Grealish, Foden, it's kind of a bit of a lottery. I mean, it's difficult to get your head around on exactly what they're going to do, because the options are just so much better than in any previous tournament.
Yeah, the options are genuinely incredible. But I think one of my issues is that I look at it and I think, I don't actually know how you want this team to play. Because I think if you want to play like really energetic, high pressing style, I'd actually be inclined, no matter how good he is, not to pay Grealish. I'd be much more inclined to say, okay, right, you're going to play Sterling, Mount and Foden behind Kane, and those guys are just going to work and work and work. You could even put in, somebody like Dominic Calvert-Lewin, or even Danny Ings if he gets taken, like guys who are really, really hard working. Like, the issue is that, like, to me, the distinction, Grealish, every time he plays for England, everybody seems to say he's like man of the match. But I do wonder how many players you can carry in the press. And Kane will do a bit of work, but not that much. People think he's a much harder working forward than he is defensively. Grealish does next to nothing defensively. And to me, it just seems like Southgate's love of Mason Mount, I think, is largely based around the fact that Mount does so much more pressing than you'd expect, so much more tackling and intercepting than you'd expect from a conventional number 10. So I guess I'm a bit worried that, like, what England might do with this particular setup is maybe fall between two stools, where they've got half a really hard-working defensive team and half a sort of more languid creative side, and it'll be a little bit of it'll be kind of neither one thing nor the other.
Yeah, I think that is a very real risk, and you're right to bring up Mason Mount's defensive sort of capabilities. I did a tweet maybe a couple of weeks ago about, I think he's second for tackles in the Chelsea side behind N'Golo Kante, and I think he's third for pressures in the Premier League, and something like fourth for successful pressures in the Premier League. And it's like players like Højbjerg, Kante ahead of him. So he's operating amongst sort of elite defensive midfielders, although, well, I don't know whether Kante and Højbjerg are truly elite, but elite, very good Premier League defensive midfielders. And I feel like I think Mount might well be the shock of the summer in terms of not his performances necessarily, but I don't think many people, if they had to pick their 11 right now, would say Mason Mount is a nailed-on starter, whereas for me, he's more likely to start than Foden, and he's more likely to start than Grealish for me as well. And Grealish is a funny one, because it's taken so long for most people, myself included, to really appreciate his attacking talents, and acknowledge him as one of the best attacking players in the Premier League. It probably took me at least 6 months too long to realise that. I thought he could often be wasteful with his passing, was mainly my sort of issue with him, but his dribbling just takes him so far beyond everyone else. And he's now become such an efficient player in the opposition box as well, something that he didn't really have 2-3 years ago as well. But he's not... he's going through a little bit of a dip in form and then got injured for Aston Villa. I don't think he'd contributed that many goals in the 4 or 5 games prior to him getting injured. And maybe he's just not quite hit form and then got injured at the right time for England this March, which are going to have a massive bearing on what happens in June. So I'm still sticking with a midfield of Henderson, Rice, and probably Mount if they're fit, and then Foden coming off the bench to replace Mount if they need to have more control further up the pitch, because I think Foden does retain possession really, really well, and then Sterling, Rashford, and Kane. And if Henderson's not fit, I don't think that he'll shove another creative midfielder in there. It will definitely be 2 more defensively minded midfielders in a 4-3-3 or 4-2-3-1. And I think it's probably Calvin Phillips is next off the cab in terms of a defensive midfielder. I don't think it's going to be Winks. I'm struggling to even think of another player that could fulfill that role. So there's potential, a lot of change in this England side going into a major tournament. But the good thing is that Stones is back fit. He's back on form. Luke Shaw's now providing excellent competition for Ben Chilwell. So there's proper competition for places, and if he picks Nick Pope in goal, who knows, maybe we can get beyond a quarter-final.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, like, the thing I find difficult here is that, like, when we're talking about these kind of lineups for England, I'm not sure whether we're predicting what we think England might do or picking the lineup that we think is actually best for the side going forward. Because I don't know, I obviously don't really care about how England do. But also there's the part of you when there's any side I'm not really bothered about England. I don't mind if they win. I don't mind if they lose. But I do kind of think that they should be the best version of themselves they can be. And I'm a little bit on the fence about what that version is. Because the thing is about Foden, I kind of feel like now of the 4 best number 10 types in the Premier League, I think City have 2 of them, I think the top 4 creative midfielders in the Premier League are De Bruyne, Fernandes, Grealish, and Foden. And there are other guys who offer other things like Mount, but I think as an actual number 10, Foden is a better example of that than most other players in the league. And I'm quite intrigued to see what he can do if he's handed the reins to an attack, because it was interesting you talking about that kind of unopposed practice, because what he's got to me is quite a Cazorla type skill set. Yeah. Like when he dribbles, I don't think that he's so much beating people for pace, though he is surprisingly quick, but he's got that amazing pressure release dribbling. He's incredibly good in tight areas. Obviously got a great eye for pass. I think it's 2.7 key passes a game since Christmas, which is absolutely ridiculous, especially for a player of his age. And I kind of feel like England's best attack might be Sterling, Foden, Sancho behind Kane. Like, as much as I love Rashford and as exciting as I think Grealish is, I think that might be a more coherent attacking midfield band with a higher ceiling. But then I suppose we do have to get into the question of who plays behind. And I worry a little bit at that point because of Henderson's, I think, diminishing physical range and injury issues this season, whether he and Rice are just capable of covering enough ground there, or whether you then want to play a kind of more defensive backline. Like at that point as well, you can also see an argument for playing someone like Wan-Bissaka over Trent Alexander-Arnold, because you've got so much attacking passing in the midfield that you'd say maybe we go for an out-and-out defender in the back line, despite the fact that you've got one of the best creative passers in the world available at right back.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I feel like it kind of depends on the style of opposition as well. I feel like I'm with you in terms of some games, in the harder games, I feel like Rashford is a great option to have on the counter-attack. But if you're trying to break down a deep block, I think you're probably right. I think the trickery of Sancho, the incision of Foden, and Sterling as well, who's so used to now playing against deep blocks, is probably more suited to it than than Rashford. I feel like often Rashford is at his best, and he's got so much better with his creativity as well, and he's so comfortable. He's a magnificent all-round footballer. I don't think he's the best finisher in the world just yet, but that's a debate for another day. But I feel like he's probably the one, if you're playing against the side and you're going to see 60% of the ball, they're going to sit very deep, say the Czech Republic in that first game, then I feel like maybe Rashford is the player to bring on against tired defences late on, and try and stretch players. The only thing is, if you play Kane, Foden, Sterling and Sancho, you probably end up seeing Kane drop into that sort of 10 slot, and then Foden maybe drift a little bit wider, and then you're looking for Sancho and Sterling to make runs in behind. And one criticism that I've got of Jadon Sancho, which is, not many, I think he's an exceptional player, but I've seen lots of people like Bundesliga experts, people that watch the Bundesliga far more often than me, and it's something that I've slightly noticed as well. He loves ball to feet in wide positions. He's maybe not the best at making those sort of arcing runs behind his man to be played through by Kane or Foden. So that's another thing to consider as well. So maybe you would need Rashford making those runs in behind. But it just comes down to, as you mentioned there, those midfield options. Like, it's probably the weakest area of the squad now, central midfield alongside central. Well, if Joe Gomez gets fit, then Connor Cody, Tyrone Mings, maybe there are better central defensive options. But central midfield with Henderson out, it's just a dearth of quality options, particularly with Winks so out of form. So it's pretty much Rice and Calvin Phillips really, and then you're looking to play Mount, who's an attacking player, in a midfield role. So they're going to have to try and get that balance right, and I hope it features Phil Foden at points in this tournament, because his performances so far deserve it. I mean, he's at 2.2 shots inside the box per 90, which is 9th in the Premier League, and only Sterling and Cancelo have completed more dribbles in the Man City squad. He ranks 10th in the Premier League for expected goals and assists, not including penalty kicks, which for a 20-year-old who hadn't played a lot of football prior to lockdown 2020 is an exceptional tally. And he's come on leaps and bounds this year. He deserves to be in the England squad. It's just so exciting that he's now in the reckoning to start, having been a bit part player at City up until lockdown. So things are looking good for Foden. Things are looking very, very good for England in their attacking options. I just do still worry about that central midfield.
Yeah, I think so as well. I mean, obviously the hope, I guess, for England fans would be that like Bellingham continues his progress.
Bellingham,
and,
of course, yeah.
And just turns into a star. But otherwise, I mean, you see people this season talking about Ward-Prowse going, and yeah, there's conversation about Winks, and you think, oh God, like, I mean, you compare that to the front line, and it's chalk and cheese. But
yeah.
But before we wrap this up, I wanted to ask you about some of the other youngsters who are in contention, because I'd argue that I think someone like Bukayo Saka has to go, not just because of his performances, but because of his versatility. Like being able to cover as a wing back, being able to play on both wings seems like something that Southgate is interested in. Like positional versatility, I think, is something that definitely appeals to him. But do you think that there's a chance for guys like Greenwood, Hudson-Odoi? Do you think that Dele Alli would have a look in if he has a strong end to the season? How strong would his end of the season have to be in order to get a shot at the England squad?
Sadly for Dele Alli, I just can't really see it happening. I don't think he's going to get enough game time to deserve a place on the plane over someone like Bukayo Saka. And Saka, being able to play left wing back, left back, right. I think he could probably play a right wing back in certain games. He's obviously devastating off the right wing. I feel like Saka has to go, and I'd probably put him ahead of Greenwood now for that plane. I feel like you can't really argue against that. I feel like Greenwood's probably the more naturally gifted player, and I think he's probably going to be one of England's best players for the next 10 years. But who deserves to go more out of Mason Greenwood and Bukayo Saka right now? Clearly Saka. I mean, he's carried Arsenal pretty much all season long. You saw, actually at the weekend, to be fair, I thought Arsenal were pretty impressive actually without him, especially considering they didn't start Aubameyang, didn't start Partey, Smith Rowe went off as well. So that was pleasing from an Arsenal perspective. But I feel like Saka might have to be on the plane. I'm struggling to see where, because he's obviously going to try and pick at least 4 central midfielders, and it's probably going to be Ward-Prowse, Calvin Phillips, Henderson and Rice, I would have thought, just because I think he seems to really like Ward-Prowse and his dead ball abilities as well. But I agree, probably not the strongest all-round pick in there. And then Harvey Barnes' injury has just happened at the worst possible time for him, just as he was getting ahead of a steam up as well. But the left wing slot where he's played most of this year is England's probably strongest position along with right back. So of that lineup, I think Saka's got to be on the plane. I think Hudson-Odoi's close to being on the plane if he continues to sort of keep Reece James sort of in and out of that side as well. And I think Hudson-Odoi, Saka, and then Greenwood's probably the one to miss out, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, look, is Greenwood fit to lace Bukayo Saka's boots? Probably not. Like that. That's overall my take. Is Bukayo Saka the best winger in the world? Probably yes. Like that's really what's going on there. Like
he's been awesome.
He's incredible. He's incredible. Like I genuinely can't quite get over it. Like it's been such a miserable season. But Bukayo Saka, I think is now. I think he might need to play one more game, but then he will be the youngest player after Cesc Fabregas to make 50 appearances for Arsenal. And he's been really good in that time as well. It's not just like he's coming on for like the last 3 minutes, like Foden was for like the first kind of 3 or 4 seasons. I mean, admittedly, it's a lot easier to get into the Arsenal lineup than to get into the Man City lineup. But that's pretty exceptional stuff. And when you factor in, as you say, you know, he actually did play right wing back in the latter half of the Benfica game on Thursday when Arsenal desperately needed a goal. Admittedly, that was a horrible period of the match where Mikel Arteta was like, we need a goal, threw on a bunch of attackers, and then nobody knew where they were meant to be. And our midfield looked incredibly open until Bukayo Saka created something out of nothing, and we went ahead.
What a ball in.
It's just been fantastic to watch, and like his decision making is, I think, what really sets him apart. Like that is something that also sets apart Foden and Sancho particularly. You know, young players, you see them with great dribbling ability, you see them able to get shots from dangerous areas. What you don't tend to see is fully formed decision making. That was something that Wayne Rooney had when he broke through, and that really set him apart. He had that incredible physicality. Obviously amazing passing range and goal scoring ability, but also just decision making was always excellent. And whatever is going on at the youth level in English academies right now seems to be paying dividends, because it's one of the most exciting crops of young players coming through anywhere in the world, I think.
I couldn't agree more, and it follows a slightly underwhelming 8 years of talent coming through for England. I feel like between the players of players around 30, there's not that many world-class players that play who are English right now. I feel like Kyle Walker, Harry Kane, that's pretty much it. I think Henderson's had a great last few years, but the talent between 25 and 32 in the England squad really isn't very good. It's not particularly exceptional. Whereas the talent between 25 and 18 in the England squad, there's players in there that if they continue on their current trajectory will be amongst the best players in the world. Whereas the age group above them, there's so few that are English. And I think we've slightly kidded ourselves between the 2014 World Cup, even, well, Russia was the sort of the start of the new crop coming through, but there's not that many players that you could say were in the conversation for best players in the world in their position, whereas it's going to be a very different story in 10 years' time.
Yeah, it wouldn't actually be that surprising if in 3 or 4 years, Foden, Saka, Hudson-Odoi, maybe
Sancho.
Greenwood as well, like are literally all world-class attackers. Like that is totally possible, and that's a really scary prospect for a lot of other nations around Europe. And to be honest with you, like I think that everyone in England will be absolutely insufferable if the Euros take place here and England end up winning them. But if Bukayo Saka plays a key role in it, then I'll be okay with it, I think.
Get him on the plane. There is going to be some very unhappy people on football Twitter when that squad is announced, whenever it is, probably mid-May, because there are going to be some big names that are missed out and some players that deserve to go that won't be able to go just because of the talent available.
Yeah, I truly think that Southgate will be relieved if there are some major injuries, just because it will stop him making decisions. Like probably the fact that Ali hasn't really played and Maddison's been injured all season has made him think, thank God that I don't have to like piss off those fan bases. But I think that bit pretty much brings us to a close here. Dukes, is there anything that you'd like to plug before we say goodbye?
Yeah, well, if you've enjoyed our discussion about Phil Foden, obviously go over to Football Daily and watch the FD Explained video that went out on Saturday. Really enjoyed writing that, as I said earlier. Go check out Continental Club from last Friday as well, where we talked about the most cursed clubs in Europe, with Spurs getting a big feature just before they then went and beat Burnley, which was quite annoying for that title. But yeah, go and check that out. Although beating Burnley 4-0 at home, yeah, nothing really to write home about.
Yeah, exactly. But on the topic of curses, I've also just written an FD Explained about Thiago and whether there's actually anything wrong with him, like whether he's been the problem for Liverpool this season. That'll be going out this week, so keep your eyes peeled for that if you're a Liverpool fan, or if you're just annoyed by the narrative that Thiago is a problem for Liverpool. Thanks very much for joining me today, Dukes, and thanks to you guys for listening or watching at home. Make sure that you're subscribed to us as an audio podcast or at Football Daily Podcast on YouTube, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.